Hello everyone, this is Jason from Primetime Aquatics, and today we're going to be looking at the Chinese algae eater. It sometimes gets a bad rap, but we're going to share our experiences with the Chinese algae eater. If you've got experience with it, please leave that in the comments section below, so stay tuned.
Okay, so here you see the Chinese algae eater in all of its glory stuck to the side of the glass. This is one of three that we have in this 150-gallon tank with a mix of some cichlids, some large semi-aggressive community fish, some large just regular community fish. These Chinese algae eaters come from the river systems in Southeast Asia where the water there is clear and fast moving. I have found these fish like to be in the tank next to the filters and where the where the outtakes are and where the bubbles are coming out of the sponge filters. They seem to like that area. So in terms of their size, there are reports that they will get 10, 11, 12 inches in the home aquarium if it's the proper size. In my experience, I have not seen them get over 7 to 8 inches, even this 150-gallon tank. After 5 years or so, the largest I've seen is about 7 or 8 inches, but expect that they could get up to 10 inches or so in length. Coloration, you're looking at it, it's not exciting, it's brown. When they're young, they're kind of tan, they have like a black stripe going down the center. As they get older, at least all of the ones that I've experienced, they just wind up looking like this color here, this muddy brown, and here's a great picture of it. So I don't know if anybody would necessarily call it a beautiful fish, but it may have a place in some tanks. Now in terms of their temperament, this is where things get tricky. When they're young, they are relatively easygoing. The older they get, sometimes they will become a little bit more aggressive. Now I will say I have had these fish in as small a tank as a 37-gallon with really just a community setup, and they were in that tank for 2.5 to 3 years and never had a problem. They were in there with small tetras, peacock gudgeons, you're just your average community fish, and never saw any problems. There were bristlenose plecos in there as well, and if anything, around feeding time, if there was food at the bottom of the tank, the bristlenose would bully the Chinese algae eaters away from that food. The only Chinese algae eaters I have right now are in this 150-gallon tank, and again have never experienced any issues. And that one of the reasons could be the amount of hiding places that they have, the size of the fish that they're in with, and their temperament. However, again, there are plenty of reports that will tell you that as these fish get older and full grown, that they are a semi-aggressive to aggressive sort of fish. There's also caution in terms of tank mates. You're going to want to have, and you can see here a really good picture of what we have in the tank: large tinfoil barbs, geophagus, acaras, severums, frontosa in there, and these are relatively fast fish. They're large fish. They're somewhat semi-aggressive fish. The one thing that you may want to exercise caution with, and right now these are in here with an angelfish and 3 severums they have a lot of surface area. They're wide fish, flat-bodied fish, and there are reports that the Chinese algae eaters will sometimes attach to those wider fish and eat the slime coat. I have never seen that happen in any of my tanks, but it's something to think about, especially if you've got discus or something like that. I don't know if that's necessarily something I would chance, or even some nice severums or angels, but at least from my experience, that hasn't happened. I've never seen it happen. I've had Chinese algae eaters for many years with these types of fish and have not had a problem yet. Now, in terms of their temperature, they're relatively easygoing. I've had them as low as 73, 74, and as high as 82 to 83, and they seem to do okay in all of those instances. pH in this tank that you're looking at right now tends to get a little bit low just because of the organic matter, and usually the pH in this tank is right around a 6.6 or a 6.7. They tolerate it just fine. They seem happy, but I've had them in tanks where the pH is 7.7, 7.8. They seem to do okay there as well. Now, water hardness, again, out of my tap, it's sometimes around 300 parts per million. And in terms of the water quality, we again try to keep all of our tanks at a nitrate level of definitely less than 40 parts per million, usually 25 to 30. There's never any nitrites or ammonia in the tank, and they enjoy that. again, would appreciate the clean, clear water. That's where they're coming from in nature, and they typically like that in an aquarium as well. Now, for food, the wonderful thing about these fish is they're not very picky. The young ones will vigorously eat algae, and you can see this tank is completely clear of algae. I have never, in the years that I've had this tank, taken an algae scraper to the glass. Never, not once. And right now, keeping that tank looking like that, at least the glass, all of the decorations, all the fake plants are 3 Chinese algae eaters. And in a moment, or at some point in the video, you may see a royal pleco, but that's it. And those fish do a great job of keeping the tank clean. That's why they are there. So there are reports that adult Chinese algae eaters do not eat algae. I have not found that to be true at all. I think the trick is, at least in this setup, we've got a lot of fish who are aggressive eaters, the tinfoil barbs, the bala sharks, the clown loaches, the geophagus. All of these fish love to eat. They eat quickly, and so not a lot of food makes it into the gravel, which means the Chinese algae eaters and any plecos, if they're in this tank, they really do need to eat off the surfaces, and they do that, and it works out great. The one thing I do like about Chinese algae eaters compared to maybe a bristlenose pleco, let's say, is the Chinese algae eaters, at least I find them eating off of the fake plant leaves, where I don't typically see that with the bristlenose. So that's kind of a cool thing. But again, I have found them to eat algae just fine. I have had no issues with them not eating it. In fact, the one thing you may want to consider is if you are going to add, and not just a Chinese algae eater, but whether it's bristlenose, anything that's going to be eating algae, if it's a new tank, that may not be the best thing in the world to do, because they do need to be able to eat the biofilms and the algae off the surfaces of whatever's in the tank. And new tanks will not supply them with the food that they need, at least in that way. So you're going to want to add maybe algae wafers or some food that will sink to the bottom. Otherwise, they won't get the food that they need. But they will eat flake food. They will eat pellets. It's just if there's not a lot there, then they're going to switch and have to consume the food that's there. And like I said, they've been doing a great job. Now, in terms of tank size, what you're looking at here, again, is a 150-gallon tank. I've had them in tanks as small as 37-gallon. I think that's probably pushing the limits in terms of the size on the small side, because again, you're looking at a fish that could get up to 10 inches. What I will say that I've noticed in terms of the size is these fish tend to grow to the size of the tank more than a lot of the fish I've seen. In a 37-gallon, I had these. They were about 3 years old, and they were maybe 4 inches, and they stayed that way, never got any bigger. And then I moved them into the 150, and they grew a couple more inches, but they never got any bigger in the 37-gallon. So they kind of grew to the size of the tank that they were in. Now, in terms of what they appreciate in a tank, the decor, hardscaping, we've got a lot of places for fish to hide in this setup, and I think especially the Chinese algae eaters appreciate that. I also think it's especially important if you're going to be keeping more than one in a tank. The tank should be on the larger side, and there should be plenty of places for them to hide and kind of stake out their own little territory. It will help cut down on the aggression. Here you see a picture of the royal pleco that we have, and they actually get along just fine. In fact, you will find them sometimes stuck to the glass right next to one another. I've never seen either fish chase each other around. Now, I do want to mention one thing about breeding. It's generally not done in the home aquaria. There's very little information out there about breeding these fish, and it's just not something I've really seen. It's not something I've attempted to do. It's not something I've ever seen these fish attempt to do. So the breeding side of it, you're probably just better off getting them from some source. They're cheap enough where you can buy as many as you need, and it's not really going to set you back too far. So overall, positive aspects. At least from our experience, this is a fish that does do a good job, as you can see, of cleaning algae and maintaining a nice looking tank. We have not had the aggression issues that a lot of people report, but I would not discount those reports, because again, we've got a setup here that seems to be working. And you could put these fish in your setup and be like, wow, hey, thanks. I've now got a severum that's missing scales or part of its slime coat, or I've got an angelfish that's not looking so good because of these Chinese algae eaters. So you do have to exercise some caution and think about the mix of fish that you have in this tank with this setup with these fish. It is working. We found them to be hardy. There are challenges. They're going to get big. So I would not recommend trying to put these in a 29 gallon or a 20 gallon. They're just going to probably get too big, even though they do, as I mentioned, grow to the size of their tank. It's just not something I would do putting them in a small tank. Also, again, be aware of your larger flat-bodied fish. We don't want the algae eaters doing damage to them. And again, there are reports that they do stop eating algae as they get older. I tend to think that's because there may be too much food going to the bottom and they just choose to eat that food instead of doing the algae eating activity that they do, at least in this tank. So final thoughts, it is a semi-aggressive fish. I would treat it as such. I would think a lot about the types of fish that you have. Again, the fish that you see here, it's been working out great. I have had them in with African cichlids, and that's worked out okay at times just because they are faster. And even at times when the bristlenose plecos weren't working, the Chinese algae eaters did. So this is probably not a fish I would put in with, like, let's say guppies or platies or anything like that where you've got the real docile sort of fish. But if you've got something a little bit faster moving, a little bit more aggressive eater, slightly more aggressive personality, it may work out pretty well. Now, the other thing I will say to kind of close this out is if I have a choice of an algae eater, I will probably choose a bristlenose pleco as my first option just about every time. And then use these when the bristlenose either isn't working or I think this fish can handle this slightly more aggressive environment.
All right, everybody, so again, that's our experience with the Chinese algae eater. It may not be typical for some of you, might be different, but if you've got experience, again, leave that in the comments section, because hopefully what we're doing here is we're building a community, and someone who's investigating that fish can not only watch the video, but watch the comments section, read the comments section below, and gain some information there. I recognize we're just one fish room, and so our experiences may not be the same as yours. So if you've had a different experience, again, leave that down below. So some things coming up. If we were to look at the other side of the fish room right now, behind the camera, we would see some stands, we'd see a whole bunch of tanks laying all over the floor that are being painted. So we are really into our phase 2 build out. We're going to be adding some 20s, 20 longs, some 29s. We've got a whole rack of 10 gallons going in. And so be looking for that in the next couple weeks. It's going to be pretty awesome. We're going to add a lot of tanks, a lot of capacity here very shortly. So if you like this video, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.